Hello and welcome to my second video in the second chapter. So I guess we could call this video 2.2. And in this video, I was originally going to introduce a multi-shot weapon, but I think it might be better for us to start exploring GameMaker's script system, because the script system can really facilitate us expanding our weapons on our player ship. So it would be worth for us to look at it now, so that we would be able to add the multi-shot laser a lot easier and a lot cleaner, kind of in the next video after this. So let's start and explore what the script system does. So most of our scripting is based off of events that are happening on an object. So in this case, I have the object player. We have events, and we could have different key presses, different world events, just all kinds of different conditions. And for the most part, most of our script makes sense just to place inside of this code editor. But the issue that arises is kind of what we're starting to see right now. And my step event, because I decided to move all of my movement controls in here, my step event is becoming quite large. And you can see that we have like 120 lines of code, and that's just hard to navigate. And then furthermore, if we want to start spawning weapons, this procedure that I've done right here for this laser is actually a pretty common procedure that I want to do, where I instantiate the laser at a given X and Y, and all of this. And so this, if I want to spawn a laser and it's 4 lines of code every time, that gets a little bit kind of cumbersome. So what we would want to do is try to turn this into a script so that it becomes easier for us to create lasers. And then even look at a larger picture script making, like we could actually turn all of the movement code for the player into a script, so that this step method becomes a lot easier for us to read through. So with that goal in mind, let's actually start doing that. So I'm going to create a new script here. And so I right-click the scripts folder and I go to scripts. The name doesn't really matter too terribly much, because you can actually have a lot of scripts, a lot of different functions inside of one script file, but you probably should be descriptive in your name for it. So maybe SCR for script underscore player attacks, because this is going to be the script for my player attacks. Now notice it did rename the function, but the function name doesn't have to be tied to that script. So for example, if I want to rename this to be spawn player laser, then I can choose to use that for my function name instead, and then the script is still fine there. I'm able to actually put other functions underneath this as I want. So with that, we need to think about what kind of parameters we want to provide here. So what kind of inputs do we want? Now, a few notes about this. So if we're going to call this method spawn player laser, if we're going to call it from our step event, the scope of the variables that we would have access to is we would actually be able to see instance variables, even though this script isn't necessarily tied to the player ship. Technically, anybody could run this script. So if we're referencing specific instance variables that are unique to the player, obviously you would crash if you try to reference this script on something that's not the player. We would not have access to local variables. So for example, this variable pulse laser cooldown, or var left keyboard check vk left, or keyboard check a. So those would probably need to be parameters. But when we think about it, so like when we're looking at this, what might make some sense is the object that we want to spawn as a parameter the speed that we want the object to travel at, the direction that it wants to travel at, and we'll start from there and we'll add some more. So let's go to our script and let's add some parameters. Now, the naming of this could be slightly better. So there's an underscore here, and it doesn't like my naming convention. It actually prefers to just underscore it out here. So this parameter is called underscore object to spawn, comma, underscore speed, comma, underscore direction. I'm choosing not to use direction because if you notice, it's going to start thinking that could be the object variable direction. So all of my parameters are starting with an underscore because that's just the syntax that GameMaker likes to use for this. Now, noticing, unlike C type of languages, we don't need to specify the data type. Similar to Python, the GameMaker script tends to figure that out. And we can add some extra context information for mouse over. So if we put a triple / comment and say @function, and we give our function our name, spawn underscore player laser, we can specify out this header again, and then we'll be able to see this when we call it elsewhere. So then we can do @param, and then typically you can specify the data type. So this would be, well, I guess this would probably be more of a reference, although technically I guess it's an index. So object to spawn, and then we put the description after it. So then we have @param real underscore speed, and then that's the speed to set it to. And then we have @param, this is another real data type, direction, the direction to spawn the object facing. We'll see where this comes into play when we put this function to use. So inside of here, we do want to basically repeat the code that we used for the player to spawn something. So we're going to say var laser equals instance underscore create layer. And we want to create it at the player's X and Y on the player's current layer. And then we want to specify that we're spawning object to spawn. And then we are going to set its speed. So we're going to say laser.speed is set equal to underscore speed. Laser.direction will be set to underscore direction. And laser.image angle will be set to underscore .direction. So this is what we typically do as a basic spawning of the laser. And so let's put this to practice with the player. I don't think we actually have to save this. So I'm just seeing that star and I'm used to compilers needing me to save that. So let's use this. We're going to come back to this and add a few more features to it. But let's jump over to player. And now we can really kind of clean up some of this. So I can actually delete this out, and now I can just say spawn underscore, and you can even see that now we've got an auto detection of this method that we just created. So you don't even need to type your whole method. And then down here, we can see the parameters that we need to type. If we mouse over it, we get a description of what all of our things are. So you can see that in the orange text, it's specifying the parameters. And then below it, it's specifying what we said with the param fields, what each one of these things meant. So the object we want to spawn is obj player pulse laser, comma, the speed was one of our variables here, pulse laser speed. And then the direction is the player's direction. And so that will now spawn my laser. So if I hit play, we can see that I'm now getting my laser to spawn exactly as it was doing before, but now we're doing it with a single script. So those 4 lines are just a single command now. And what's really impressive is we can begin to expand on this to add some more features to it. So let's kind of talk about the other issue. Now, what if I still need to reference this? So in my previous way that I spawn these, I would often say var laser equals that, but unfortunately you can see that this is going to be undefined because this doesn't return anything. So we can go back over to my script and return a copy of the laser. So we can say return laser. Again, GameMaker, you don't have to specify return types or anything. It just kind of figures that out. So when I return this laser, I now have a reference to it if I want to. I don't have to use it, but I have this reference in case I want it. So if I go back to the player object, nothing changes here. I don't have to use that return. I can see that if I mouse over this, it's now returning an instance ID, so it's returning a reference to the laser, and it still works perfectly fine. If I spawn my lasers, works great. But now, if I want to do more inside of here, I could actually just say var laser equals, and then I would be able to interact with it. Maybe I want to set the speed to something really slow, and then this would override the behavior that happened inside of this method. So then I can hit play. And you can see that, I'm still getting a reference to this laser so that the player can modify it, but only if I need to. I don't really need to change the speed. I'm kind of happy with what it's doing. So I could leave it like that. Now, another thing that we could add that would be an interesting feature is if we jump down to our script. So GameMaker supports optional parameters, and optional parameters are really fun. So let's say we wanted to be able to spawn things that have a potential random variation in their angle that they spawn at. So we could say underscore random variation, and then we could set it equal to something. So this instance variable is now an optional instance variable. If you specify it, so if you specify a 4th variable in the sequence, it will replace the default value of 0. So now what we can do is we can build that into here and make use of random underscore range and say from negative random variation to positive random variation. Oh, we need a plus sign here. So we have our direction plus random range from negative random variation, comma, positive variation. Oh, I probably should actually declare that as a separate variable. So, because otherwise, if I did this again, like right here, what ends up happening is it generates 2 totally different random numbers, and the direction it picks might not be the same as the angle it decides to pick, so it would look kind of weird. So we actually just want to take this code, put it here, and instead say direction plus random direction. And that way we're guaranteed it's the same random number for both the the actual physics direction of the laser as well as the appearance direction. Because if I actually just put this in there twice, you get different values, and the laser might start flying sideways, basically. So because the default is 0, this is going to just generate a value of 0 and make no difference. But if I choose to specify a value for this, I can replace that, and now it would. So let's go check out how that works. So I'm going to jump over to player real quick. Let's actually put a comment here. So just put a little comment, generate a random variation on the angle the laser fires from. So if I go back to the player ship, notice again, I don't have to change this. It's an optional parameter. So if I hit play, works perfectly fine. But notice I have no random variation in my shots. But if I wanted to, as a fourth parameter, I could specify, maybe I want to have a 20-degree random rotation in both directions. So it's going to have a 40-degree arc that it shoots from. And then when I hit play, we can see that now I'm getting some random variation in my shots. So this could be very useful for things that we might add. So if we wanted to have a little bit of kind of random spray to a weapon, we could do that. But I don't want to for this one, so I'm not going to include it. But it's an optional parameter, which is a really neat feature. All right, so now with that added, we'll come back to that when we start adding a few new weapons. But let's try to clean up our scripts as a whole. So the goal here is I want to clean this entire thing up. So let's start by making a new script for player movement. So I'm going to create a new script, scr underscore player underscore movement. And I might just rename this because I would just prefer to call this player movement. Now, what I want to do for this script, and I guess I'll fill that out once I actually decide my parameters. The parameters that I would want for this script would actually be the inputs here, because most of my movement actually just has to deal with if I'm pressing left, right, up, down. So those are going to be my parameters, left, right, up, down. So we'll pass in left, right, up, and down. And so if we wanted to put our description here, at function, we will copy the name here. Perhaps I should use underscores so that I'm kind of consistent with GameMaker's preferred syntax, so that it is a little bit happier with me here. Notice that those little warnings. So for parameters, it prefers to use these underscores. So that's my function here. And I'll include comments for my parameters, and these are technically Booleans. And so underscore left, the state of the left key and the state of the right key, the state of the up key, and the state of the down key. So whether or not it's being pressed or not. We can always put that in parentheses. So true if pressed. So we'll put that as our So what we'll do over here inside of the object player, so I'm going to jump back over to player real quick, is basically take everything from my line 20, so starting at this H input, basically where I start calculating the horizontal or the vertical movements. I'm going to copy all of that. Actually, I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to highlight, click and drag all the way, including mouse steering, all the way right here to right before we begin the player attack code. I'm going to hit Control X to cut it. I'm going to move over to the script for player movement, Control X to paste it. I am going to indent it, so I'm going to highlight all of this and push tab so that it gets some nice indentation. And then all I have to do is just call this method from inside of my player object. So I didn't make any changes to the script, I just copied and pasted all of this here. And like I said, this script is going to execute in the context of the player object, meaning it will see these instance variables such as Excel, max speed. Now there's one that I do need to fix right here where I'm trying to do left and right. So anywhere where I refer to these old inputs, I need to make these the underscores now. Oops. Where'd that go? So underscore left, underscore right, underscore up, underscore down. And then I need to go fix this here on line 15. Underscore up, underscore down. I believe those are the only references to that. I'll double check though. Yeah, those are the only references to it. And so we would need to make those tweaks to make sure that it lines up with the new names for the parameters. So over here in Object Player, after I've gathered my input, all I've got to do is call my player underscore movements and pass in left, right, up, and down. I just need to pass in those parameters and make sure that my script is called the correct thing. It might actually be. Gotta check to see if it's called Boolean. Yeah, it's called bool. So over here, I want these to be called bool. Which will then fix the description on the mouse over just so it's more accurate. All right, so that will then invoke the player movement, and notice it cleaned up this step script a lot more. This is so much more readable. So when I hit play, it still functions exactly like it was before. If I hit P to turn off mouse movement, I can still use my keyboard controls. If I press P to go back to mouse movement, I still can. So all of my old movement stuff is still there. It's just now condensed into this single script. And so we have my player movement all right here. In a very nice and collapsible form. So if I don't want to think about player movement, I can just close this script, and then I don't need to worry about it unless I want to tweak how the player works. So I actually kind of want to do the same thing for attacking. So I'm going to build one more script under player attacks. So right underneath this spawn laser, I'm going to add a function called player attack. And I want to send in the primary attack variable. Oh. I guess the data type there is index. Oh, I'll look that up for the next video. So here I have my parameter of whether or not I'm pressing the attack key. So I'm going to basically move all of my code for the player attacks down here. I'm going to do the same exact thing. I might copy and paste this so that this function has its information. Right. So I'm going to go back up to the player method, to my player object. My script is called, or my method is called player attacks. Oh, maybe I'll just call it player attack, singular. All right, so go to object player. We're going to take all of this out. So I'm going to highlight it, Control X, go back down to the script, paste it, fix the indentation with Tab, and then update this if statement to use this underscore of primary attack. And then I'm going to jump back to the player and then just call that method. So player attack, and passing it in primary underscore attack so that it passes in the information if I'm attacking or not. So when we hit play, we can still attack, we can still move, but now this step method is organized. We have our scripts handled down here. So movement is this one giant script. And then attacking is in the same script as the code that I used to spawn my laser, so that it's all organized in the same spot. A little bit easier to deal with. And so that's going to wrap up this video. In the next video, we will go through and make a multi-laser, and then also explore like spawning from different locations on the ship. So instead of spawning always in the center of the ship, how we would go about spawning lasers on the side of the ship. And that gets a little bit mathematical, but it's interesting to see because otherwise we're stuck always spawning in the dead center of something. So thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next video.